Wel, croeso, cynnes iawn I chi.
Well, a very warm welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here today to guide you through this event in partnership with the Senedd and the Iris Prize Festival. This event is part of the Sennedd's activities to mark LGBT History Month.
Congratulations and yeah, welcome to this event in partnership with the Senedd to recognise LGBT History Month. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I'm going to start with you because it's alphabetical, okay? It's not because you're from Ynys-Môn, which is obviously where all the good people come from, including myself. But we've just seen your beautiful film, and the film obviously follows, well, in a strange way, for me, it follows the history of a house, but it, obviously more importantly, it follows the history of some amazing people. It's an award-winning book, isn't it, by Mike Parker?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit to us about how you came about the story? You know, where did it all start?
Yeah, sure. So I came about the story because it was in a newspaper article talking about Mike first of all, and then about the book. And it just piqued my interest because you don't see many stories or queer stories in Wales, especially in Wales, you know, in newspaper articles or across news platforms. So it just kind of piqued my interest, and the story sounded incredible. So I bought the book and I read the book, and if you've read it, Mike, the author, his writing is incredible. His descriptions are so beautiful. It honestly feels like you're walking with him when he goes through like how he's walking around the house and stuff like that. You feel like you're walking with him. But not only that, the story of how he came to get the house and how he came to meet Reg and George as well. It was so, I don't know, magical is a word, but I don't know if that's quite the correct word, but it was so out of nowhere, and it seemed to be like two couples that were meant to find each other almost. So yeah, that's kind of area of the story just really fascinated me, and I thought it was so beautiful, and it was a real celebration of love, but also like a community when you find it, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's how I found it, and that's kind of why I fell in love with it, really.
So you found gold dust really to start off with.
Yeah, honestly, like when I found the article, I was like, why is no one else talking about this? Because the story's just stunning. So, but yeah, it's lush.
You alluded there about the past, and that, you know, maybe we don't know enough about the past. How important do you think it is for the present generation of LGBT people to understand more about the past, thinking specifically about you know, LGBT experiences? Obviously, in this instance, pre-1967.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand a queer history. I think it is a brilliant thing to do because, you know, you're not taught it in schools, and it's very rare that you're kind of like, I mean, now obviously there's more of a celebration of it, but you have to kind of go out and find it almost. So it's a real special thing to do because it helps to understand the whole history of a culture, because what you do is when you learn about queer history is you learn how much was gifted to our culture from queer history, but not only that, but also how much hardship has gone through as well. But I don't think it's just on the LGBT plus community to learn about their history. I don't think you have to be queer to understand that history or to learn it. I think it's just as important if you're straight or anything else that you also understand that history, because it helps you to become an ally to that community. It helps you to have a better understanding of what people are going through. And I also think it preps you better for the future. It preps you, I suppose, to really understand a community, even if you're not part of it. That's the important thing. So yeah, it's so important. And now there's so many different ways that you can learn. You know, there's not just books now. It's, you know, there's documentaries covering it. There's entire TV shows. I mean, It's a Sin is on Channel 4 at the moment, and I know it's a drama, but it's a drama based on real painful experiences, and it's so important. I mean, I think I cried for about 3 days after watching it. Like, it's just so heartbreaking, but often that's how people's entry points now into queer history is through drama, through documentaries, and that's such a good thing. And it's brilliant that those stories get told and celebrated, so that, you know, people aren't forgotten and what they went through isn't forgotten, and that's what's really important.
And It's a Sin, of course, written by Swansea's very own Russell T Davies. So
Yeah.
Very, very proud of. You, what were the key messages then from the book that you felt you wanted to share through the film? Was there anything specific that you focused on?
I think for me, what I saw in Reg and George and Mike and Pledydd is that they found almost like a family in each other. Because often, you know, if you are in those communities, you don't feel safe often to be open in public about about who you are, and often because of that you have to hide such a massive piece of you. But with Mike and Pledydd and Reg and George, I felt like they created this like sanctuary, this space where they felt safe and they felt like they could be open. And so I think it's kind of creating your space, your world, but also your own family, no matter what that is. It doesn't have to be blood family, it can be friends, it could be people that you've met, it could be your housemates, whatever. So I think it's building, those sanctuaries for yourself, but not just in places, in people too, who can help you be who you are and to help you, celebrate those parts of yourself that maybe you thought you had to hide. But actually, they should completely be celebrated, kind of thing.
So although they're LGBT, they're kind of universal themes, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So universal, yeah.
I'm going to be very clever here. I've noticed in the last few minutes that both of you are documentary filmmakers. So as my segue into asking Ian his set of questions about the film, I was going to ask you, I hope you don't mind me calling you a documentary filmmaker. And I was just, what is it about documentaries that means that you've decided to produce them?
When you're observing life, isn't it? I guess you come across stories, or you come across people when you're out for a walk, or you're working with friends, and then you come across stories that are extraordinary. I mean, some of the most extraordinary stories you see now are documentary. I mean, if you watch Netflix, some of the huge hits for them have been documentaries, because some of the stories you couldn't even write them as drama, could you? Don't with cats. Am I allowed to? That's for example. It's like where did that come from? And I think because they're so close to, people think that there's the idea that there's a document of where we are, because that's why they call documentary, I guess. That it represents where we are now, and actually we live like with extraordinary stories around us. So for me, that's the attraction. It's like, as Anna said in her, she reads a newspaper article, goes, this is extraordinary. Why is nobody telling this story? So I guess, I'm attracted by that, by extraordinary stories around me, I guess.
What exactly attracted you to, from the title, it's quite gruesome, isn't it? Go Home Polish. What made you feel that this was something that you wanted to take as an idea and invest in as a film to share with an audience?
For me, it just felt like a no-brainer. I mean, he is a friend of mine who decided that, given he'd seen some graffiti on a wall saying "Go Home Polish," and me seeing the pain that he'd gone through, and then was going to walk all the way back to Poland. I mean, it's just like, it was offered on a plate to me, really. I mean, it's just like, here's an amazing story. So it was an opportunity not to refuse for the magpie who's looking for the looking for a bit of shiny objects. This is a great story. So it was there on a plate for me, and again, knowing Michał and knowing his own history of his sense of place, it just felt it was the right thing to do. It just felt like the right thing to do for me. And again, there's a lot of adventure in that, because we didn't know what we were going to find. I mean, was he going to get stoned by fascists somewhere because he was in the media talking about Brexit? Was he gonna break a leg? So that was kind of extraordinary. We didn't know what almost didn't know what the story would be, and that would
be my crucial question to you. As in, either you are a genius, which I think you might be, either you've been very lucky. But I'm kind of thinking, not knowing where the story was going to go, it wasn't a conventional TV commission, was it? I think you've been very modest, because this wasn't, here's, £50,000 from a broadcaster to make a documentary. You weren't commissioned. You knew the story, but you had no idea where it was going. And then the implications of time. So how did you make sure that you didn't bankrupt yourself, or that you didn't sort of disappear into this film world, not to come out for years? Because obviously, I guess you've got bills to pay and all of that stuff. So how did you contain what could be something that could have consumed all of your time?
Interesting. We were talking about it this morning, actually, with my partner Rhiw, and we were talking about, actually, in a way, I almost wish I had bankrupted myself with it, because mainly because we were so restricted by, we were restricted by budget, because the travel was over like 3 or 4 months. It was across Europe. There was no funding for it. But for me, the extraordinary story would have been following him all the way, so that we saw much more of the people he met, the ups and downs of the journey, the conflict, if there was going to be any conflict, the jeopardy, but which was really difficult given that we didn't have much of a budget. So the story, and I was busy on other work as well. I think we were doing War of the Worlds or something at the time, but we were just really busy. So we had to cut our cloth accordingly, which meant looking at different narratives and say, okay, this is one way of telling this story, and we can tell this story with using these locations. We can tell this story by using by having his home footage. And there's certain stories we couldn't tell, for example, because whenever we met Michał, we'd be happy because he wanted to see us. Well, of course, if you're documenting his happiness, it's when the day before he's like wanting to kind of give up the whole thing. It's quite difficult to not be too contrived about, we don't want him crying the day after for camera just because he's struggled the day before, if you know what I mean, because he was genuinely happy to see us.
Sound difficult? Yeah, no. Well, I can see where you're at now, but I can also see the next problem is you have this huge amount of content, and obviously you need to edit the thing down. So how painful an experience was that?
It was very painful. It was very painful. It was really painful because there's an expectation from audiences of a beginning, middle, and end that makes sense, and actually. Because of Michał's character, he doesn't like traditional narrative in his own work, but actually on a short film you have to be fairly traditional. I think you have to set out your stall and be signpost quite well, and so for example, in the edit, in the early version of the edit, he was angry. He was very angry about Brexit and about Go Home Polish, but then struggled with the idea that he was an angry foreigner. So there was a lot of backwards and forwards about how he wanted to represent himself, which actually from a narrative perspective would have been quite easy. Very angry, goes on the road, starts to see humanity and comes out the other. So actually the footage was all there, but it was how we crafted that into a story that he was happy because we were representing him. And I think that was more of the difficulty, is actually being fair to the person who you're representing, and that was harder. And given it's a friend, you also you don't want to off by producing a documentary that they're not feeling like represents who a part of themselves that they want represented. So that was difficult.
Cool. Anna, do you find it interesting that people are surprised sometimes that most documentaries are scripted, that there is a beginning, middle, and end, that they think somehow they're not like fiction. And I was going to ask you on that matter, as a filmmaker, what did you learn from your experience with Rhiw Goch that you're going to take with you to your next project and future projects?
I'd say the main thing that I learned was definitely relationship with contributor, because we had such a strong relationship with Mike and with Predir throughout filming. I mean, if you work in documentary like Ian does, it's an absolute privilege to be invited into anyone's world, into anyone's story, and for anyone to even trust you with that story, kind of thing. So your relationship with your contributor has to be like spot on, banging, like honestly cups of tea with them all the time. But so yeah, that was like the main thing that I learned. It's like you build that relationship, but you also maintain it, and because it's out of respect, and it's out of, that's how you get the best stories as well. But also, yeah, when it came to kind of editing the film as well, we, just like Ian, it's quite a savage process, because you end up with this huge amount of material. You can go in to a master interview and have all your questions set down, have 10 questions, and still come out with a 2-hour-long interview. You have to then get down to like 4 minutes, along with like, we had so much archive as well to fit in. And like, no matter how well planned you are, I mean, it helps obviously if you go in with a shot list. Shot lists are key, they're vital, and they do help you because they can, you're kind of post through the story. But yeah, it's quite a savage process then to sit down and be like, actually this huge, big, important part, and chop it out, and how do you navigate that kind of thing. So,
well, you're very lucky. There is a red button in front of me, and I have the right to press that to terminate this conversation, so we're not going to go on and on and on. But I think we've done really well so far, and we've avoided COVID, or mentioning the pandemic and the way it's affected people's lives. But as filmmakers, of course, both of you have, I guess, had an almost exclusive online experience with your films. I know you released or made the film, your film, Go Home Polish, available slightly before things went all horribly wrong. But I think both of you, what was the experience like the last 12 months, where you clearly had something rather special, but you couldn't necessarily go to different festivals in person and do all the things you do at film festivals? Ian, do you want to start?
It would have been fantastic, I think. I was lucky enough to see it on the big screen, Iris on the Move, and for the got mixed up which year now. 2019, Iris, the opening of Iris 2019. It was 2019, yeah. God, I'm confused. Yeah, then, which was fantastic. So I was really lucky enough to see that, because there are, you know, visually and cinematography wise, there's quite a lot of vistas. To see those on a big screen was fantastic. So it is quite, you know, it would have been nice to have seen that again. But I think because of the relationship that Iris built with Channel 4, it gave an amazing opportunity, I think, to show it wider. And it had, you know, it's been in other film festivals as well, virtually, sadly. But yeah, so yeah, it's a shame in that sense.
Anna, are you one of these individuals who believes that film belongs naturally in the cinema?
I don't know. Over the last few months, Netflix has got me through some dark points, so I don't know if I can say that many bad things. I think it's an experience, isn't it? The cinema, it's completely different. It's whole unique thing to go like with your friends or on an awkward date or something to the cinema. It's just special, and to see a film in a dark room and have even like the cinema smells, it's just its own experience. I've really missed it through like these lockdowns, and I'm also like cursing past me that just like would just walk into a cinema, watch a film. But I think the lockdowns have proved that like it does work on Netflix. I know that some people might cry at that, but it does work. People are in their own living rooms. They're still getting those, you know, viewings. It gets some films to areas that maybe they would have had a lot like a slower process reaching before. You know, I come from North Wales originally, and we would have to wait ages before a film would reach us, rather than if you lived in Cardiff, kind of thing. So, but now someone from their bedroom or their living room can watch it quite quickly and straight away. So the access is amazing. That's brilliant for film, for sure. But yeah, I do miss the cinema, to be honest. It's just lush, isn't it?
You've alluded to what one of my next questions was. Obviously, you're from Ynys Môn originally, or Ynys Môn wreiddiol.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you, what was your experience with film as an industry when you were in Ynys Môn? And because both of you have made the capital city your home, and it's seen as a massive powerhouse. It's seen as this amazing place for moving image across the board, television, film, games. So Anna, if you can maybe just take us back to the days of Ynys Môn and just guide us on your journey to Caerdydd.
Yeah, I mean, I don't come from a media or film background at all. And I suppose film for me, especially as a teenager, you know, it's a weird parallel in that you grow up somewhere like Anglesey, Ynys Môn, and it's a stunning place, beautiful. But when you're a teenager, there's nothing to do, nothing to experience. You know, the same circle of people, and there's just experiencing an outside world comes through film, it comes through TV. So it's really, I used film to kind of educate myself about different cultures from all around the world. You know, you can even watch a gangster film and know a bit more about New York than anything else. So it became like how I experienced the wider world, especially when I was younger. And I remember the first time that I had any experience of like a film, or I guess TV set, is that Rownd a Rownd, which is like the Welsh soap opera, would film at our school. And I can remember being 15 and you got paid like 20 quid or something to stand in the background as an extra in your school uniform. And I was like, this is amazing. So it's just like, it just really impressed me, the whole world. And I think because the whole glamour of it is added, because that's how you see the outside world compared to your community. I think that's why I got so dragged into it and so impressed by it. So but I didn't have any experience, and there wasn't any opportunities in North Wales either to get into film. So it was quite difficult to navigate. I ended up going to film school, and that's how I got into the film industry. I don't think I would have got in otherwise, because it is an industry which isn't that accessible, I will say. Like, it's very based on who you know, and you often have to build those connections, and building those connections if you come from the middle of nowhere is really difficult. So yeah, I went to film school, and that's how I got into working in the industry.
And the film school was
University of South Wales, the Atrium in Cardiff. And it's through like Sally Lisk-Lewis, who's the lecturer there. She was the one that was like, you're made for documentary, like get into documentary. And I'm so thankful to her, because she's right as always.
Oh no, she's amazing, and she can identify talent a mile off and guide it in the right direction. Ian, what was your journey like to being, you know, a very prolific producer of content in the moving image?
I think for me, it reflects Anna's experience. You've got this flickering box in the corner of the screen, or you've got a flickering bright screen in a cinema. And actually, the area I grew up in, which was kind of working class northern England, wasn't very glamorous. And here was something being presented to you on a screen. But was. Again, I don't know why I've described myself as a magpie twice today, but here's another one. But, something shiny. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Again, none of my family had ever worked in the media or the arts or creative industries. And so for me, it was very shiny. And in fact, weirdly, I was describing to somebody last night that I'd spent too long not wanting to be ordinary. So I think there was something about doing something that was extraordinary that kind of attracted me. So like Anna, but a few years before, I also found myself in what is now University of South Wales, which was then Newport Film School. And so again, if it wasn't for that education, then I also wouldn't be in where I am now. So that's my journey, which mirrors Anna's quite closely, really.
Is it fair to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that the days where to be successful in the film industry, one had to go to London or, dare I say it, further afield, that those days have gone? That we now have a sector which is growing, which needs talent, and therefore, some of our creatives are able to make a living from Wales?
I think technically, if you're in a technical background, probably yes. If you're less technical, when I say technical, I mean whether it's camera or lighting department or gaffer or carpentry or even production management or production accountancy. Yes. So for those, if you're talking about producing and directing, probably less so. Although the opportunities are there, I think much less so. So in terms of those kind of hands-on skills, probably yes. But I don't know what Anna's experience is, but I think it's a lot more difficult. I mean, I think my experiences for some of the higher end TV projects that most of the time people get pulled in from outside of Wales for direct.
And Anna, your experiences here in the big city?
Yeah, I'd say similar to Ian. It's great if you're in like a technical background at all, but I would say that it is a bit slower if you're kind of a producer or director. Directors are normally brought in from London because they have the agents in London. There's a lack of agents or representation in Wales if you're like a producer, director covering, or like art director covering those roles. Wales is a little bit slower with it. Saying that, there are still opportunities. So I think it is slowly improving, but it is still quite, I'd say it's still very based on like who kind of thing. Which I think that they do need to grow out of that, because it means it's inaccessible to quite a lot of people, kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, maybe if we sort of focus, because both of you have obviously focused on LGBT stories within your films. Do you think there's, to have a more equitable Wales, do you think there's anything that you'd want a future Welsh Government to consider implementing to improve the position of LGBT people in Wales?
I think teaching more about queer culture and history in the curriculum, that would be, I think, banging, to be honest. I mean, it doesn't cover it. I think in my schooling, I got one history lesson where they briefly mentioned 1967 when it was first decriminalised. After that, you get nothing. So I think not ignoring that huge section of culture, implementing it in a curriculum where people can learn about it from a young age, that would be incredible. But I think they'd be, do very well to do that, to be honest.
Well, I'm hoping that people will note on this day, Anna suggested, increasing LGBT gay history in Welsh schools. Let's see what happens. Ian, anything more to add on that note?
I echo Anna as well. I mean, I work as a volunteer, as a counsellor as well. I'm still meeting young people who think there's something wrong to be gay. And I think that's so much to do with education. And I think that's a fantastic thing about Iris, is that in working with schools and I'm working on showing LGBT stories, it's normalising the experience of LGBT people. And it's so important. I mean, you have kids still who want to take their own lives because they feel different. We're still living in that era. Sadly and strangely, we're still living in that era. So I echo Anna, just more history. And what's fantastic about Anna's film is it's a document of normal. These are a loving couple who cared about each other, and they were living normal lives. They weren't extraordinary kind of gay skipping down the street as ballet dancer. There's nothing wrong with that, but it was, yes, it's ordinary. And I think actually, there needs to be more of those stories, and more about the ordinariness of what it means to be queer.
Well, can I just say that we're going to be very dependent on both of you to continue sharing our stories. I hope you will find a way of sharing more LGBT stories, because as you said, I think there's a need for that. I'd like to thank Ian, Anna, diolch yn fawr iawn i'r ddau ohonoch chi.
Thank you very much to the two of you for joining us today, and thank you very much to the Senedd, of course, for the opportunity to join in this partnership on this event. It's an event held by the Senedd to celebrate and mark LGBT History Month. Thank you very much. Goodbye.